A thrilling comeback victory at home. That's 5 in a row for the second time this year. Vikings are 10-2. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day, every single day, especially on these ever the more common victory Mondays. The Vikings are 10-2 after beating the Cardinals 23-22, eking one out right at the end. A comeback that kind of took every little ounce of willpower they had. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. And today on the show, we're going to be recapping the Vikings victory. I use the word willpower. That's what keeps coming to my head. Sam Darnold went to the podium and for the second week in a row said, "What a resilient win," which means, boy, we messed that one up, didn't we? But we still got away with it. And I think that in both cases, right, the Vikings had these, moments where they looked totally inept and kind of didn't put their full 60 minutes together, but they put together enough to get the W. And that's how, you got to get a lot of wins in the NFL. I think sometimes we walk into these expecting that, well, if the Vikings are good, they'll beat every single team they see into a pulp and there'll be no drama ever in the fourth quarter. And that's just not the way it goes. That's just not an expectation that you should set. But it's still kind of funny to say resilient. Good word for it. But I think of like it's a willpower win. And the reason is, so the Vikings gave up a lot of long drives. And it was very bend, don't break kind of day on defense. All told, the Cardinals ran 81 plays. They had some absolutely back-breaking drives in this one and controlled most of the game. And don't argue with me. I know how you felt in the middle of the third quarter when the Vikings were down 19-6. You felt like the Vikings were kind of getting their butts kicked a little bit. And luckily, games don't end in the middle of the third quarter. And the Vikings' final two offensive drives were exactly the touchdowns that they needed. And their final two defensive drives were just enough, right? They gave up a field goal, and then their last drive was the stop that they really needed. But the Cardinals controlled a lot of this one. They drove down into Vikings territory all but 3 times. The whole game. 5 of those got into the red zone, and only one of them actually got into the end zone. So the Cardinals stalled out for 5 different field goal drives, right? So there was like a red zone stall thing, and the Vikings did a great job in the red zone. If you want to call that the theme of the game, it's red zone. But I think some of that, too, was the Cardinals totally falling apart. And I think of maybe the moment of the game, right, is at the end of the game, and not even at the Cardinals get the ball up 19-16. Vikings score a touchdown, kick it back. And the Cardinals get the ball with like 11 minutes left in the game. And they rattle off an 8-minute 17-play drive for a field goal. To me, that felt like the Vikings back breaking. Like that was it. And it felt like that was the moment that they kind of finally ran out of gas. And who could blame them? Because they were well into the 70s in terms of play count by the end of that thing. And, kind of their fault. They couldn't get off the field and they failed a lot on third downs. But the fact that the Vikings then turned that around, went down and scored, and that the Vikings defense got that stop at the end was all willpower because they didn't have a drop left in the tank. You could see it on Jonathan Grenard when he was out after chasing down Kyler Murray, who was going to scramble, but Grenard chased him down to kind of cut that off. I think it was like a 2-yard gain. And Grenard had to go to the sideline. He was done. That was play 80. It was over. And Kevin O'Connell, I think, very clutch timeout call there, even though there was 40 seconds left and the clock is weird and you maybe want to, no, you got to just use your timeout so that Grenard can have time to catch his breath and get your best defensive player, let's be honest, back on the field. And sure enough, they get a bunch of pressure. Kyler Murray throws one up, throws an interception, another interception earlier in the second half. from Byron Murphy. The last one was from Shaq Griffin, and the Shaq Griffin one seals it. So the defense had its struggles, and I'll get into those in a little more detail later tonight, and then also on Wednesday we'll probably talk a little more about that if there are more questions about it. But I think general themes, right? I think most of this game the Vikings got really out physicaled. You could see it in the trenches. The Cardinals were just getting more push. They were just getting exactly the spacing they wanted. A lot of holes to run through. And that's just getting blocked up. That's getting the crap kicked out of you by a more physical team. I wouldn't be surprised to see a lot of physicality in the secondary as well on when the Vikings had the ball. We'll get into more of that later. But I should also mention, while we're talking about, beating them up and bruising them, there are a couple injuries to mention. Stephon Gilmore has some kind of hamstring thing. He goes out for this game. He doesn't come back in. Fabian Moreau comes in, gets targeted a million times with mostly Marvin Harrison Jr. over him, probably gives up half of them and breaks up half of them. So it was kind of a 50-50 proposition, which is pretty good. So, they're picking on the backup corner, pretty standard stuff, but that happened. Patrick Jones and Harrison Smith both briefly exit in this one, have to come back in. I wonder if that's an injury or if that was just a cramps thing or a fatigue thing, because they were on play 80. That's good. People's bodies are going to start breaking down by play 80 on defense. And I think the Vikings defensively had, I'll call it a position to succeed problem. I don't think that the game plan put them in a position to succeed. I've got some gripes with it that we'll get into later. But the Vikings then get bailed out by these collapsy sequences. At the end of that 17-play drive that I thought was the total backbreaker, they had 1st and goal from the 5. False start, and then a grounding penalty from Patrick Jones. 3 different people won their rep on that one. Patrick Jones, Grenard, Van Ginkel, all in there. And then suddenly it's 2nd and goal from the 25. And they go run, tunnel screen, kick. It was just the series just ended. So they stalled out on, one major play, and you just got them there. Another red zone drive stalls out entirely on this was one in the first half, stalls out entirely on a holding penalty, goes to 1st and 20, and then a bad run play makes it 2nd and 18. And now suddenly you're in conservative, just don't give up a sack and make it an even harder kick kind of range. Those sequences, I bet if you go listen to Locked On Cardinals, Clancy's going off about that red zone stuff, and I know he's going to be really hard on Kyler Murray for this one. I actually, for whatever it's worth, I think Kyler Murray played a pretty good game here, but you can't excuse those 2 interceptions in the 4th quarter. Or in the second half. I think the first one is in the 3rd quarter, but in the second half, that kind of ruined everything good that the Cardinals had going for it. But, again, down to down, play to play, it was actually the Cardinals that were getting the better of the Vikings, but then they just made one or too many mistakes to kind of ruin all that progress. 1 step forward, 2 steps back, and it turned out to fall just short. And I think a lot of the worst instincts of the Vikings kind of came back to bite them for that whole time until in the middle of the 3rd quarter, suddenly they got down 19-6, and it was real. It wasn't still within a score. It wasn't, hey, we just can, it was way harder to convince yourself you were doing the right thing. And then a whole bunch of changes come, and the Vikings just start humming on both sides of the ball, including the offense. I kind of think that happened. I think going down by 2 scores in the second half was enough of a wake-up call for them to decide to change what they were doing and not just kind of keep pushing the same button. I'll talk about what that means offensively next. Today's episode is brought to you by IceShaker. IceShaker is kitchen-grade stainless steel bottles that are... It was developed by the Gronkowski brothers mostly to keep their protein shakes cold. So one of the things that they have, it's all thermally, it's going to keep your drink hot or cold, whatever you want. But it also comes with an agitator is what they call it, that kind of is attached to the lid that's meant to break up the clumps of workout powder. Or it looks to me like if you put a lemon on there, it'd be a pretty good juicer anyways. So a very convenient little one-stop thing if you want to be making Moscow mules at a tailgate or something like that. If that's the kind of thing that you're into, you can do that as well with one of these. And now it's all licensed, so you can get it with your own logo if you want to, but it's licensed with the NFL, NBA, NHL, NCAA, and MLB. So whatever your sports team is, I'm guessing it's the Vikings because you're listening to this. You can get one that looks just like mine, which if you're watching on YouTube, you can see. So order your team branded bottles today at IceShaker.com and use code LOCKEDONNFL for 25% off of your order. IceShakers, show your support for your teams with the best branded workout bottles on the market, IceShakers. Today's episode is also brought to you by BetterHelp. BetterHelp is online therapy made easy, so if a game like that means you gotta talk to somebody about it, or, real problems in your life, or just mental maintenance, which I think is just as important as anything else, any other kind of maintenance, you can check it out at BetterHelp. It's online. It's designed to be flexible, suited to your schedule, and they'll hook you up with a therapist they think is right for you. But if that person doesn't work out for you, you can change at no additional charge and just keep cycling through them until you get somebody that you like. So find comfort this December with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off of your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Moving right along here with the Locked On Vikings podcast. If you are interested in some Sam Darnold excellence, you can go to patreon.com/LukeBraunNFL. Now it's free to watch my video on his game against the Bears. It was phenomenal. It was crazy. If you want to just go soak in some propaganda, or if you're thinking about what's wrong with the defense in these 2-minute drills, a little less relevant now since they were very successful on one. But hey, they gave up another scoring drive before the half, so still kind of happening. And what I think is going on there. But the next major topic is the Vikings offensively and the kind of day that they had that really mirrored the day the defense had. They were really inept for 2.5 quarters. But then middle of third quarter, they're down 19-6. They answer that touchdown drive, down 12-6 after 4 field goal drives to the Vikings, just 2 field goal drives. I think both teams also have a missed kick in there. And then the Vikings go touchdown, win the game. A very clutch performance, and kind of Q4 Sam Darnold has started to become a thing. It's just that in the past games, they've only needed him to take up a bunch of time and go kick a field goal. Last week they needed him in overtime and he delivered really hard. But I don't know, Sammy Ice, we're getting this a little bit, man. But the reasoning, I think, is that they went back to some of the easier stuff. This is the same complaint that I've had a lot, and grain of salt here, because I've had this complaint and then sort of backed off it once I see the tape. But sure, live, it sure does feel like they're going for shot play. They are just stringing shot plays together. Again, twice this game, they have sequences where they go 1st and 10, 2nd and 10, 3rd and 10, drive stall. And you just go back to those and you think, man, couldn't one of those been a run for 4 that sets up 2nd and 6 instead? And then you can maybe, move the chains and we can do a normal drive instead of trying to eat everything in one bite. But it's also really hard to argue with this. So let me give you a sense, because it's really hard to see exactly how aggressive the play concepts themselves were, but you can tell. And if you're watching on TV, you probably could. Sam Darnold was holding the ball a long time and seemed to be waiting for deep stuff to break open that he then ran out of time for. I would guess there was a lot of pressure here, but it really depends on how long into the play before these pressure metrics stop counting it as pressure. Because if you stand in the pocket for 5 seconds and then pressure comes, a lot of them won't count it as pressure because it's kind of unfair to the O-line to count that. So it depends, but you could kind of tell that there was a lot of that. But there is a sequence in the second half, from the start of the second half all the way to 11 minutes left in the fourth quarter, right? All the way to the end before that 17-play drive. So literally everything. You can even expand this to include that. So you could say for the first 28 minutes, or 27, I guess, minutes. They got 3:20 was when they had their final touchdown drive. For the first 27 minutes of the second half, the Vikings ran the ball 4 times. The whole time. Once per drive. And I don't mean on average. I mean literally 1 time on each of their 4 second half possessions before the touchdown drive. And then the touchdown drive itself, I believe, didn't have any. No, they did have 1 run in that one, but then the clock started to become a factor and stuff. But so they ran the ball 5 times in the second half. And it's not, they spent one of those drives, they were down by 2 scores. So it wasn't like they were like trying to mount a really crazy comeback. It just like Kevin 07 on, like he just forgets that he can. 1 run per drive in the whole second half, literally 1 time. And Aaron Jones runs, he had his fumble problem. We'll get to that in a sec, but Aaron Jones runs had an 80% success rate in this game. They were running the ball well, at least when they had their good running back out there. Now, there is obviously the complicating factor of Aaron Jones's fumbles. So first drive, Aaron Jones fumbles, and the second drive ends on, or it starts and ends on a check down to Aaron Jones where he fumbles and the Cardinals recover it. The Vikings got the first one back. So you have this fumbleitis issue. There's also a wheel route to Aaron Jones that some people are calling like a terrible drop. That's a really hard catch. He didn't call it a failure, but it's not an egregious one to me. But that it could have been a touchdown, and then they ended up kicking on that drive, so it could have been really decisive and a thing we'd be complaining about a lot. But it's a hands thing, so we're like, oh my god, butterfingers. But I would say that you probably expect maybe 40% of those diving catches to be made by your running back if you're being like really generous. Like that's not the position that does that. But the fumbling issue is real for Aaron Jones. And so if the Vikings don't want Aaron Jones to be in there because they're worried about the fumbles and that's kind of the end of the story, I get it. And you just have to know that the cost of that decision is that runs with this guy are really, really good. But it wasn't even about that. The Vikings just didn't run the ball at all. But it's really hard to argue with that because the last 2 drives that they just stopped running the ball worked out great and turned into a whole bunch of chunk plays and like really fast touchdown drives, like really just like knife through butter touchdown drives. So it's like, I have to point it out that like the Vikings just stop running the ball sometimes, especially in the second half of games. And when you're, going 1st and 10 and then 2nd and 10 and then another incomplete pass and you're going, wow, how do we get behind the chains? It's like, you could have called duo. We're really good at it. And when I say success rate, that means that wouldn't be a run for 2 on 2nd and 10. These have been runs for 6 and 7 that set up 3rd and manageable and get you out from behind the chains. And they're just not doing that. They're just going to keep going for shot plays over and over and over and over again. And it's just eventually the dam breaks and they started hitting them. But I think on those last couple of drives, those concepts themselves started to like calm down a little bit. You got Hawkinson on choice. They had a very important sequence. This is what Sam Ekstrom wanted to talk about a lot on the postcast, and I'm sure we'll talk about it more on the football party too. But the sequence where the Cardinals have this 17-play drive and it ends with a 4th and 4. They get out of that that 2nd and 25 nightmare situation with a 4th and 4, and then they kick instead of going for it. You go for it, you get the touchdown. You're basically coronating the rest of the game. But even if you don't get it, there's the would you rather be up 3 or if you're up 6, it forces the offense to be more aggressive, which is what Greg Olsen was saying. Jonathan Gannon played it kind of chalk and kicked, and then the Vikings get theirs back. But there is a moment on the way back where the Vikings have a 4th and 7 in field goal range. So if Jonathan Gannon had gone for it and not gotten it, it would have been 16-13 at that point. And instead of throwing a 9-yard pass to Justin Jefferson on stick, that was beautiful, total dart, they probably would have kicked a field goal there, tied the game up, and we would have gone over. And maybe the Cardinals have a better chance there. But hey, candies and nuts, right? It shoulda, coulda, woulda. The way it actually plays out is in those last ones, Sam Darnold finds that rhythm. And I think the Vikings took a moment to get that rhythm. To like, hey, you got to like start feeling the timing and the rhythm of these plays, and then we can go for the explosives. You got to eat your vegetables before you can have your dessert, maybe a little bit. So like, I'm harping on this really hard, even though they won the game, because this is like, I think the vibe a lot of people had while watching the game. And if you think I'm being too negative, let me go see your game day tweets. But that led the Vikings to be in a much harder position than I think they had to be. And if they were a little bit more willing to do easily executable stuff, not conservative play calling, but just stuff that they can do easily, every time they do that, they march down the field and score a touchdown with little resistance. And I like the plan that marches down the field and scores a touchdown with little resistance. And that's what I felt like I saw. And maybe that was just because the Cardinals were totally collapsing. Obviously, the whole second half for them was a nightmare after nightmare, right? From the the first Kyler Murray interception to now a questionable go for it or kick the field goal decision that Jonathan Gannon has to answer for, and then the defensive meltdown ending in another interception. And so maybe the Vikings just kind of played a really good team, but only for 35 minutes. And if that's the case, then great, right? You don't put together a complete game, you can't beat the Vikings. I would be very glad that that's true. But I do think that there is a lesson to be learned in this one, where if you look at when the Vikings were succeeding and looking at where the Vikings were failing, which is a very distinct line that you can draw between them, and you can see what were they doing differently. When they were succeeding, they were more true to the concepts that have gotten them here. And when they were failing, it felt like they were like either trying too hard to press the issue or just outthinking themselves. And that, to win a game that you don't play your best football all day, shows a sort of fortitude where, you show up and sometimes you do show up with a game plan you thought was going to work. You had all these ideas and it totally fails on you. And being able to find a way to win that game anyways is evidence of a fortitude that is just that's the thing that's sticking with me, right? That's why I keep saying willpower, because they really willed their way through a win that for much of this game they did not deserve. And they found a way through sheer want to. I think that's just really dope. It just rocks. So I want to talk about that next. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. FanDuel is a great place to get in on a little bit of side action, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. So go bet $5 on anything, whether it is, a super heavy favorite money line, some alt line for Anthony Edwards to get, 2.5 points that he's going to get, something like that, whatever it is, or maybe even a live bet, which the FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place, latest stats, live play-by-play, so much more that can help you put all the information you need all into one place. You can drop a live bet, but whatever it is, put down your first $5 bet on something, and if it wins, you can get $150 in bonus bets back. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Today's episode is also brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is the best place to find last-minute tickets if you're trying to get to a game. If you're trying to get to this next game, Vikings hosting Kirk Cousins, big event. If you're trying to get out to it, check out Game Time. See if you can find a good price on there. Game Time's whole thing is finding good prices by sort of manipulating the last-minute ticket market, and they have their all-in pricing feature, which is a switch that you toggle that shows you the price you will pay at checkout up front. No hidden fees, no extra service charges or whatever nonsense a lot of ticketing apps are going to kind of pile on you at the last minute. No. Turn this on and you know exactly what you're paying. And if you find the same section and row somewhere else for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference, and your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Terms apply. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Okay, I want to make a super esoteric boomer point. It's super. I'm going to be really foosball guy. This is not rooted in any objectivity at all. But it's game day and I get to do it, and there's nothing you can do about it. So we're going to go. So I think the Vikings came in defensively with a bad game plan here, and I think it's because they moved away from what they are. And there's two main things I'm talking about here. One, the Vikings ran more man coverage in this game than they ever have all game long or all season long. I think that's a crazy thing to do, to bring to your man coverage plan to a game against Kyler Murray. And I think I get where they're going, which is that their confidence in their cornerback room has been growing all year long. In Gilmore, Shaq Griffin, Byron Murphy, these guys have been stacking pretty good games. I think the Rams was the only time that I thought those guys kind of had a bad one. And so they've been stacking a lot of good games, covering very well, and saying, hey, we trust you a little more. And on any defensive scheme, it doesn't matter if it's Brian Flores's or Zimmer's or Fangio's or anything that is run in the NFL for the last 600 years, like ever. If you can man cover, you will have more success, because if you have 5 guys that can match up with their 5 guys, it leaves you 6 other guys to do a lot, to just wreak havoc. You can blitz all 6 of them if you want. You can have a spy on the quarterback. You can have a deep safety. You can have somebody trying to poach and rob, or you can do all kinds of things, right? Cover one's the best coverage in the league if you can execute it, but there's not a lot of guys in the league that can execute it. And so not a lot of teams in the league can play man coverage a lot. And the Vikings, I think, felt like they were one of those. And I think they got a little hubris. So the plan also used a lot of quarterback spies. Not always a quarterback spy, but they had a lot of spies on Kyler Murray. It was a very old school plan. We're going to man you up. We're going to have a guy sit there and watch the quarterback, and we're going to rush 4 and beat you. And they didn't do that. The pass rush didn't get home. The coverage was good, but Kyler Murray was better. That's going to be the way I put that. There's some absolute strikes in this one early in this game from Kyler Murray. And they were able to move the ball kind of at will. They were able to convert 2nd and 15s, it was 3rd and 12s. And beyond that, here's the other thing. I think spying sucks. Are we allowed to say that spying is bad yet? Like, that is a bad idea. And I hate hearing, like, even today, I still hear reporters all the time, hey, you got a mobile quarterback. You going to spy him? Like, that's not the plan for a mobile quarterback anymore. And it hasn't really been a popular one since like 2005. At least not in the NFL. And the reason is, you can actually hear Michael Vick talk about it. Mike Vick was asked about, hey, how do you feel about when, people spy you? And he's like, yeah, well, I love it because there's one less guy in the coverage now. It's like a very costly way to have a guy that's still probably slower than that quarterback looking out for that quarterback. This is just the benefit reward is not worth it. And so I don't like that was the plan. Man coverage loses to mobile quarterbacks, right? Because you don't have your eyes on the QB anymore. You turn around, you look at your man, and suddenly you look behind you, dude's been running for 30 yards, and you had no idea. And that is like one issue with man coverage. And the other one is it's just really hard to take away throws if they can manipulate your leverage, and there's options, and there's so much stuff going on in offenses that beats man coverage. So many man beaters in everybody's offense. So that's one issue I had. And to add to even more, the Vikings have been really good in zone coverage, right? So they took something that's been working and they kind of moved away from it. And the other thing is they took something that's been working really well, which is their cover 0 look. I think they ran it twice in this game, 3 times maybe. Correct me if I'm wrong, and I'll go back and look, and maybe I just missed a bunch of them. But I don't think they lined up in their 0 look a lot at all. And the other 2 games where they haven't lined up in their 0 look a lot? I'm charting all this for a big giant piece that I'm working on. Lions and Rams, the 2 that they lost. The 2 that it felt like the offense could like move the ball at will at times. Because the Vikings went away from that cover 0 look. Now, you don't want to know where they used it the most. Will Levis's Titans, Mac Jones's Jaguars, and then, funny enough, the Texans at the end of that game, after things were totally broken, they like spammed it a whole bunch of times, and that turns into one of the ones. But isn't that a whole bunch of offenses you don't respect? The Davis Mills Texans, because they didn't do it against Stroud, but once Davis Mills came in, they started spamming it. And Levis and Mac Jones, so they're going to run cover 0 when they don't respect an offense. They're not going to run it as much when they do respect an offense. That's kind of the pattern that I've noticed. And so they showed this Cardinals offense a ton of respect on the back end or on the front end by not running that 0, and then no respect at all on the back end by man covering and saying, well, we don't think your receivers are good, but we also think your offense is good. That feels very incongruous to me. So this all boils down to is I think the Vikings had a position to succeed problem. They had an issue with putting their players in a position to make the plays they needed to play. If you're just in man coverage on a guy, you can cover that deep over all you want, but the perfect throw is going to beat you. And being caught out in those situations, getting caught out in certain blitz looks on 3rd and 2 where the corners have to play really off, have to They do not get the option to play press no matter the down and distance. So calling that play and putting them in that situation, I think, is a bad play sequencing move. I think there were a lot of mistakes like that in this one, and that's why the Cardinals were able to string together so many 10-plus play drives and ultimately have the ball for 81 total plays, dominated time of possession, but I think play count's a better version of that idea, and gas this defense out. And I think the players bailed it out a little bit. And there's a grit to that. There's a willpower and a toughness to that. I see the Cardinals as a gritty team. Like, they're a physical team. That's kind of what we learned about the Cardinals, is that they're physical and they'll beat you up. And so are the Vikings. The Vikings are a very physical team. Maybe not quite as physical as like the Lions or the Steelers, teams that are like more famous for it, but I think they're very underrated physical. Maybe I'll put it that way. So this was always going to be a knock 'em out kind of fight. And it came down to, at the very end, who could play tired. And that was the Vikings. There's something really encouraging underneath all that frustration about that, isn't there? That the Vikings were the team that can play gassed. You think that might come up in January? It's got as good a chance as anything. I will talk to y'all tomorrow for the mailbag. You can send me questions via email at lockedonvikingspodcast@gmail.com or in the Google form that you can find in the description to any podcast episode. I will see you all for that. And as always, Skol.